This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin here today with a guest you may, long time Jeff Rubin Show listeners may remember from way back in episode 8. This is Justin Ouellette. Welcome back to the show, Justin.
Thank you very much.
Now, almost 200 episodes, 6 years ago, you were one. We've been friends for a while. You were one of the very first ideas. When I was thinking who should I have on the podcast, one of my very first ideas was you. And we talked about primarily, as I recall, this website that you had done a few years before that, even so a really long time ago now, called Muxtape, which was a music sharing website, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that is episode 8. Go open up the podcast. Keep scrolling
That's
down,
awesome.
scrolling down until you find it. But now we're not going to talk about that today because you are doing something quite different, which people have probably already read the title of the podcast. They probably already know that you are now the CEO. Is that correct? The CEO?
Yeah, that's right.
Of a marijuana testing facility in Oregon.
In Oregon, yeah.
Okay, so what's a marijuana testing facility? It's not just you with like a bong, like taking hits, giving a thumbs up to some guy at the door, right? Like this is a full-on science thing.
It's a lab. In fact, it is a scientific laboratory, and you're exactly right. It's not like we're not like ice cream testing. It's scientific testing, and we are quantifying how potent the marijuana is. We're also checking for things like pesticides and trace solvents that are sometimes left over when marijuana is turned into products like hash oil and other edibles and things.
The reason I had that big, long setup, and for those that maybe didn't go back to listen to episode 8, they should understand that this is not your background. Like, you are not a scientist. You are you've got a lot of hyphens going on already, but you are a web designer / photographer / software engineer.
Yeah.
Those are the big ones.
Yeah, definitely.
You worked on Vimeo, which is where we met, and the New York Times, but you've also taken pictures for our friend Anna's book. What's the book called? Let's plug the book.
There's The Daily Face.
The Daily Face.
And now Pin It, the sequel to The Daily Face.
So but you took the pictures for our friend Anna Tendler's hair and makeup book, which is like very different from the stuff we already mentioned. So I'm just trying to set people up for like that this was not something you knew about. I don't know. How long ago did you start this?
So we started. It's been like I guess about 2 years now since we started talking about it.
Mm-hmm. And who's we?
So it's actually a family business. It's me and my brothers. I have 3 brothers. 2 of them are involved in this lab, and we actually have a 4th founder who is our chief science officer.
And you guys are from Oregon.
Scientist.
You and your brothers are anyway. I don't know about this chief science guy.
Yeah. We're all from Portland, Oregon, and that's where I was born and raised before I came to New York. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was one of those things where it's really, software is really the thing that kind of ties everything together that I've done over the years.
Would it be fair to say that you approach photography from like a more technical perspective than most photographers?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm very interested in the technical aspects.
Like, you understand how the camera actually works. I think a lot of photographers do, but like, you really got into that.
Yeah.
So why did you guys decide to do this? I guess there's the talk of marijuana becoming legal in Oregon. But why? I think the first thing most people would think of is you open up a dispensary or a store, whatever they call them there, and actually sell the pot. How did you guys instead decide to actually open up the testing facility, which I think most people don't even know exists?
Yeah, well, it was one of those things where it's like, so marijuana has been legal, at least medically, in Oregon since 1997. It was the second state after California, and I think the first to do like a statewide medical marijuana program. So there's a lot of precedent and culture in Oregon, and frankly, businesses that already exist. So like just walking around Portland, even a couple of years ago, there are lots of great dispensaries already, and there are farms that have been around for decades who really know what they're doing.
So you could buy medical marijuana for years in Portland, but recreational is new there for like the past year and a half or so, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Is medical there like the medical marijuana system in California, where it's not particularly difficult to get a medical marijuana license?
I will say that it's a lot of people are card-carrying Oregon medical marijuana.
Understood.
Per capita, yeah.
Gotcha. So there were already dispensaries, but
Yes.
you were interested in getting in the industry, and you were like, what are some other things we can do here?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like lab testing is a whole new thing, and it's a whole new thing in part because it's been illegal essentially to do like scientific research on marijuana just, like as a scientist. A lot of that research is normally done by federally funded grants, and they're limited to working with. There was a New York Times article recently about the government marijuana farm at the University of Michigan, I think it is, where they grow all the, or it's not the University of Michigan, but they grow this cannabis that's like it doesn't resemble anything that's being grown commercially, like on the West Coast, for instance, and it's. There's not a lot of established practice or really just rigorous scientific information about cannabis as a plant, marijuana as a medicinal product, as a recreational product. There's just so much to do. It's like, it's a lot, like amongst cannabis things, it's a much newer field.
So you saw an opportunity there? Is that right?
Yeah, it's both. It's a business opportunity, obviously, but it's also just an opportunity to explore something that is just kind of brand new. That's just hasn't been explored much before.
Okay. So hey, brothers, which is what you call your brothers.
Yeah.
Let's open a marijuana testing facility. What do your brothers do? Do they do anything that would have informed and helped you guys set up this business?
Well, yeah, I mean, we all kind of have different skill sets. Like I'm like the computer nerd, and my older brother is definitely more of like a, kind of a classic business person, I guess you'd say. And so we each kind of like bring a different skill to it. And like none of us have a science background, but we're all kind of interested in science, and we're all, I think we all have learned a lot over the last year and a half and have really enjoyed just kind of like, getting this kind of education too. It's been fun.
So how do you start? Once you decide to start taking this seriously,
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even begin to what's the first thing you got to do when you decide to open up a business such as this one?
You got to find a building.
Okay, that's it. First step, find a building. How'd you find a building? I'm thinking of what's his name, Gus Fring finding like the super lab. I just watched Better Call Saul. There's a reference to that this week. What do you look for in a building? Like, how do you even know what you're looking for in a building?
So it's a lot of things, and it's tough because a lab is a special building, and it needs special ventilation and like unusually good temperature control, and it has to be in an industrial area because we have to vent stuff.
Yeah. Can I quickly interject and just note that like we have many talented and ambitious friends who've like all started businesses and done lots of cool things, but they're generally like games and websites and crap like this. You're probably the first one who had to like deal with like the actual physical
with, like,
meat
zoning
world.
and permits and stuff.
Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never had a conversation like this with someone.
No.
So what are you looking for in a space?
So permission is the first thing. So it's tough because if you're going to open, just like a retail shop that's going to sell marijuana, you have a lot of options because there are lots of like privately owned storefronts that are just private storefront. Just like you see in New York, you walk by like every ground floor place, and the difference is that a lab has to be in an industrial area, basically. Like we have to get special permission from the city in order to be able to do what we're doing.
To be a lab or to be a marijuana lab?
Both. So in addition to like being a marijuana business, which has all these like specific security requirements, and there's like all these different things we have to do, and regulations that we have to comply with. But in addition to that, we're also accredited by the Oregon Health Authority just to be an environmental testing lab. Technically, that's what we are. We're an environmental testing lab. So
not a weed facility? That's not what it says on the certificate?
I mean, we are essentially. Like, yes, we are a weed facility. But we're also an environmental testing lab, and we have to follow the same rules and follow the same regulations as anyone else who's testing like water or soil or any of the things that a lab like this classically does.
Did you like read a book on how to do this? Did you just like Google how to test weed for potency or opening marijuana labs? Just how did you research what you needed to know?
So I will be ready to write a book, I think, here pretty soon about it.
Really? Is that true? Are you going to actually write a book?
I mean, I would love to at some point.
Yeah, you should. Well, is there, because
there's no manual for it.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, there's
right?
not. Yeah.
So what'd you do?
So we hired a scientist, and we have a great family friend. His name is Aaron Troyer, and he's actually a biologist by training, but what we do is organic chemistry, essentially. And so he's a guy who has built labs and set up labs from scratch in the past, and it's like a very particular kind of skill. And you really have to have somebody who knows what they're doing. The helpful thing is like there's a lot of analogies like in the non-weed world for all these things. It's like just like how cannabis extractors that make CO2 oil or BHO, they kind of borrow their techniques from like the olive oil industry. A lot of the techniques are very much the same, and it's kind of the same thing for us. It's like the same things you would do to test, just regular plant matter for, things like pesticides. We're doing the exact same thing. It's just, instead of grapes and tomatoes or hops, it's cannabis.
Give me an understanding. How does the business work? Like, who pays you and why?
So there are strict rules in Oregon about what you sell in a store. And they have a chain of custody system that's called seed to sale, where they can actually track with a barcode that follows the plant from the moment it's, essentially sprouting out of the ground until it gets sold to a shop. And one of the things you have to do as a grower or as someone who's processing it into something else is you have to get this lab testing done. So the law stipulates exactly what you have to test for. There's a list of pesticides and residual solvents. You also have to do a water content test and some other things. But essentially, the government says that you have to guarantee that your product is safe. It's really a public safety issue. The potency number is like the important thing that our clients are worried about. And consumers are mostly worried about, like, what percentage THC is this?
So not everyone has had the glorious experience of buying marijuana in a store like a human being.
Oh, you must try it.
What are the potents? What do consumers like look for, and what are people worried about? Like that score. What is that score?
So it's great. So one of the fun things about cannabis is that it's a little bit different than alcohol, where you can just point to like the alcohol percentage on like a can of beer or a bottle of wine and say, okay, well that's going to get me so drunk per sip or whatever. Cannabis, there are multiple different cannabinoids. Number one, THC is like kind of the most potent and the most famous.
Yeah, that's the rock star cannabinoid.
The rock star one. And then there's CBD, which is cannabidiol, which is commonly associated with its medicinal effects.
Is there like I believe they're selling that in places that aren't Oregon and Colorado now, right? Like it's like
there's
kind
some
of a
states
little
that
more
have
legal, right?
CBD only states, yeah, which is
Okay.
kind of interesting because that's possible to do.
So you make so you can breed marijuana. I'm just now realizing I don't even have the vocabulary to deal with like how plants work.
Yeah.
To get rid of the THC and only have CBD.
More or less. So it's the same thing how hemp is just a legal definition. It's the exact same plant as cannabis. It just is like at some point the THC level drops to a certain level and they say, okay, now it's hemp.
But the THC level is not directly analogous to the proof in that there's other factors. Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah.
So like if I have one that's, 12% THC, is that a reasonable number? That something might be 12%?
Definitely, yeah.
How did I know that? And another one that's also 12%. One might be stronger than the other. Why?
So it's a measure of how much of that cannabinoid there is per weight of the plant. So if it's 12%, it means that, say you had 100 grams of it. I guess that would be a lot. But 12, full grams of that is just the THC. So it means that it's just that much more like effect, I guess. But that's what I was trying to say before, is that it's not quite accurate. It's not just that number that matters. There's also other things that come into play, like terpenes, for instance.
Tell me about terpenes. I've heard this word. What are terpenes?
So terpenes are kind of like entourage molecules for the cannabinoids, and they kind of come along for the ride. And there's a lot of them. There's potentially hundreds of them, and they're generally associated with strong taste and smell. A lot of plants produce terpenes naturally as to attract pollinators or to ward off predators, but we smell that as like lemon or pine or lavender smell. Those are all associated with like a particular terpene that is a molecule that we can identify. We can identify in the lab, and we do. It's one of the things we do, is that we can take your product and say you have so much percentage of each one of these terpenes.
But there's so many different terpenes. It's like you can't just say you have 10 terpenes. It's like there's different combinations of different ones that have different and this isn't just taste. These will have different effects in your...
Different medical effects, different psychological effects. different effects in different combinations. It's one of the great things that we're still learning about and trying to understand is exactly how terpenes interact with cannabinoids and how they all interact with cannabinoid receptors in the brain.
What does the process look like? Does a farmer just show up with a giant garbage bag of weed and just kind of drop it off at your door and he's like, email me when you're done?
They can, if they file the proper transfer manifest, which they can do. You can't just throw a bunch of weed in a truck. You actually have to file a document with the state that says where you're going.
Oh, wow.
How you're going to get there, who the driver is. It's very strict, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to, like, if the police pull over like a truck that's carrying,
a lot of marijuana. I gotcha.
They want to know that it's legit. And one of the things they do is they go and check the system.
Okay, so, but what happens once all of the paperwork is done and you have intaken the bag? Like,
so we take the bag in. So you
roll up a tight doober just to test it out, just to poison control. Make sure it's legit, right?
The first thing we do to prove we're cool is we smoke at least a gram of it.
Yeah.
No, it's strictly forbidden.
Is that true?
It's very true. In fact, on our door, it says in 4 languages, no marijuana use in this facility. We take that very seriously.
Wow. Yes. I mean, listeners are probably not as surprised because they don't know you as well as I do, but I'm very surprised.
I know, it's hilarious.
That's funny. That's like the one place in the world you can't smoke pot.
It's the most weed-free workplace I've ever worked in. Like, honestly.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So it comes in, you're not smoking it. Like, where does it go?
So you hand it through an intake window to our sampling technician, and they take a representative sample. So I forget the exact number, so don't quote me, but we take a small amount of up to a 10-pound bag. You can basically have up to 10-pound packages of marijuana as a grower.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Now, for those that aren't familiar with marijuana, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
So
I think we take something like 22 grams out of that, and we will actually then homogenize it is the word. We actually kind of mix it up and we try to come up with like a uniform kind of standard representation for that bag.
What do you mean? Is it like in a blender? Is it like reduced to a
liquid?
It's
literally in a blender.
So you just put a lot of it in a blender just to like mix it up?
We use Magic Bullet blender.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Cool.
Magic Bullet, by the way, buy stock. I don't know what it is about their blenders, but they're in every
I'm a fan.
Every weed facility in Oregon.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like we looked at like, $1,000 lab blenders, homogenizers, and it's like, no, nothing serves our needs like the Magic Bullet.
And then what happens? Like, just what do you shoot light at it? Do you dip it in a chemical funk? What's going on?
That's exactly what we do. So the last thing we do is shoot light at it. But the first thing we do is we turn it into like a liquid goo. So we take a little bit of that ground up weed, and it's just the same consistency as you would, roll a joint. Mm-hmm. And we mix it with solvents. I think for potency tests we would do either methanol or something else. But point is, it's a solvent, and it starts to strip away the oily trichomes from the plant matter, and it allows the product to flow through the machine that tests the potency.
How does the machine, like, what is the chemical signal? How does the machine detect potency?
So it's just
it takes a drag, like what sees how far it gets into an episode of Twin Peaks.
It takes a really long drag,
yeah,
and it puts on a Pink Floyd album.
What does the machine actually do? Like, how does the machine know how potent it is? It can sense the percentage of THC somehow.
So it basically draws it out in a very thin, long tube that's called a column. The process is called chromatography. You may have even done it like in a middle school or high school chemistry class. It's a classic experiment where you take a marker and a coffee filter.
Oh, yeah.
And you get it wet and the color separates out.
I did it with Kool-Aid.
With Kool-Aid, yeah.
In like high school, like way too late to be doing that science experiment.
Yeah. So it's the same basic idea, which is if you take a wet thing and you pass it through an inert medium like a coffee filter or silica beads or something, what happens is over time, the heavier things go slower through the tube. So they get left behind and the smaller things wind up front. So in a very long, thin tube, what you wind up with is a nice, like, kind of like striped rainbow Napoleon of like all the different constituent molecules that you're looking for.
How long does it take between the bag being dropped off to you being able to deliver your final report? Is it a day or does it take a week? Or
it takes a little while, and it's the actual run of the machine is quick. It's something like 15 minutes or so, or less, depends on the machine and the test. But the process of homogenizing it, getting all the samples ready, getting it ready for the machine, all the paperwork. We weigh everything 100 times. Doing it correctly is slow, methodical work. It's not something that you can kind of like mass produce. I mean, we have a process that we follow, but it's very much, kind of like a human-driven thing, and it takes time.
Yeah, I can imagine. How many humans are working there? There's the three brothers and the chief scientist, but there must be other people operating these machines, right?
So we have two more scientists. We have a quality control director who is kind of like a co-lab director in some ways. But it's interesting. It's like a check and balance in the lab. So the lab is also, it's an ethical institution.
What does that mean?
It means that we follow certain practices that have been formalized by standards bodies. And
what does that mean?
So it means that we have an audit trail. And it means that the scientists read a manual that defines very clearly what ethical practice in our lab is. And part of that is, reporting the correct weights and not, not taking a bribe to increase somebody's sample results and those kinds of things. Yeah.
I imagine, in addition to having learned all this science stuff, there's a lot of, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, just zoning laws, business stuff. I'm sure there's all sorts of licenses, even putting aside that it's a marijuana thing temporarily. Did you have to learn a lot of that stuff too? How did you get up to speed there?
So I knew a little bit more about that. I have a little more startup experience. It's a little bit different doing it in Oregon and doing it as a cannabis business. Mm-hmm. We kind of had to structure things a certain way, but that part wasn't as tricky. Definitely doing a thing in a physical building is like a whole, you got to talk to the fire marshal and get an alarm permit. And we built a lobby, so we did a small remodel and like getting the permit for that and doing it. There's a lot of stuff to it. It was fun.
Did you find that like you were able to use a lot of what you had learned working at Vimeo and the New York Times and Tumblr, which I think I've neglected to mention earlier? Like, was there a lot that you took from there that you were able to use?
Yeah. So. And we haven't talked about it at all, but the lab is driven by software.
And did you design the software?
And I'm writing the software, yeah.
Was that your main role in the organization, as being the software dude?
Pretty much, yeah.
And what does the software do? Because you're not, I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, are you writing the software that like runs the spectrometry machine?
No, definitely not.
So also, it's not called the spectrometry machine, right?
I don't think so.
Okay. So you're not writing the software that runs the hardware. What does the software do?
So the software that runs the hardware produces data in kind of like a very arcane format, and you have a little bit of control of it, but it's just this kind of like very raw output. It's concentration tables and recovery times and things.
Where do they go? Is it like does it put it out on a USB drive? Is it like uploaded it to a spreadsheet somewhere? Like how does the information this is the most boring question. What format does it come out of the machine then?
It's literally, I guess you can think of it as a spreadsheet, yeah. But it's not even that. It's like a CSV file, essentially.
Gotcha,
it's tab separated, so it's just like that. So what you would do normally in the lab is, or the way they have done it up until now, is to, turn it into a spreadsheet and then start doing their calculations that way. So part of what the software does is it does that automatically. It's what I'm working on right now. And it turns it into, eventually, like a nice PDF report that's like visually nice. It has all the data in a nice table. Mm-hmm. It has things, the numbers are in plain percentages that you can read and understand. And there's a lot of math to get there, and a lot of software and we got to keep the data backed up and have an audit trail, like I mentioned before, and keep track of who has access to it and all this stuff. So I'm writing all the backend software for that.
And is that done, or is that just always going to be going on?
It's an ongoing thing, yeah. And it's great. It's an unusual thing in the lab industry to have custom software that runs your lab, but it's been great. It's like everything I've learned up until now about like web software development has been directly applicable.
What did you have to learn that like you knew you'd have to learn about business stuff? You knew you'd have to learn about weed stuff. What did you have to learn that you did not expect that you'd have to learn?
That's a good question. I mean, I learned a lot about like weird corners of technical stuff I would have never cared about.
Like what?
Before.
Because you're a man who has a like weird old terminal like on their desktop at all times and stuff like that.
Yeah, I had to get even weirder. Like I had to learn a lot about like, so we had to build a surveillance system that has like a very strict requirement for the state. So I had to learn a lot about like
you can't just buy a surveillance system. You have to roll your own.
No, I mean you can't like not really off the shelf. There are companies that will do it for you.
But
but it's like when you need 20 cameras and you have to have data that's backed up for 90 days
mm-hmm.
and you have to be able to run the cameras for 90 minutes if the power goes out and all these things, and it has to be backed up on site and off site. there's all these things. Like it has to be reliable in a way that's different than,
Like the out-of-the-box package is what they offer.
Yeah.
Right. Has this at all changed the way you appreciate or consume marijuana?
Definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's different? Let's start there. What's different?
Well, let me start by saying that I've smoked a lot of marijuana.
Uh-huh.
I mean, not today, but in general.
Uh-huh.
And I appreciate it a lot. But it's learning about terpenes in particular is just kind of like really opened my mind, not only to like the possibilities of it, but also just how little we know so far and how much there is still to learn about it. But I've also it's made me appreciate just like everything you put in your body. I mean, it's like the most important thing we do is pesticide testing, honestly, because pesticides, like especially the nastier ones chemically, they are very they're hard to avoid, and they stick to things, and they float over from the farm next door, and it's.
And you're smoking marijuana and you're eating marijuana, like it goes in you.
So it's like,
do you find are people surprised when they find pesticides? Like, should they be expecting whatever pesticide score they get? Are they sometimes like, whoa, how'd this happen?
I think that people are surprised when I tell them that like fully 1/3 of pesticide tests have failed, like in the last year.
Wow, because you're right. These are people who are not just using pesticides to grow things. These are people who don't think they are, and somehow they get in there.
A lot of times, yeah. They just don't even know, or they're using something that that they didn't know what was in it.
Mm-hmm. Do other states have these sort of guidelines in place?
They're all different.
That must be fun.
It's interesting because it's for now we're just focused on Oregon, but it's when and if we do expand somewhere else, we're going to have to learn different rules in each state.
Right. What about if you were to test marijuana that you bought in a state that wasn't legal? Not that you bought, because you wouldn't buy marijuana in a state that wasn't legal, but if you were to somehow find some, just like you found some garden, nice weed in New York, and you brought it to your testing facility, what do you expect you to find? Do you think it would have a lot of pesticides? I'm asking for a friend.
So I'll just say, number one, we wouldn't test it knowing that it came over state lines.
Right. Okay, great.
So that would be a wrong thing.
Got it.
But
I'm just hypothetically wondering, like, if
you
we
were
took
able to
like
trick a
street
lab,
drugs into your fancy proper lab.
I'm sure it would be full of all kinds of stuff. Yeah, definitely.
This week's episode of the Jeff Rubin Show is brought to you by Squarespace. If you have a business or a podcast or a video series or a portfolio or basically anything else, whatever it is, if you want to get the word out there, you are going to need a website, and the easiest way to make a professional, beautiful website is with Squarespace. There is never anything to install or patch or upgrade, so instead of worrying about all of that, you can instead focus on the thing you are actually doing. And you can get your own domain name just like you've always dreamed with Squarespace's unique domain experience that is transparent and easy to use. Squarespace has award-winning 24/7 service, so if you ever get confused with anything, they are there to help. So there's really no reason not to give it a chance. And while you're there, tell them the Jeff Rubin Show sent you. Here's what you got to do. Go to squarespace.com and start your free trial by entering offer code JeffRubin to get 10% off your first purchase. That is squarespace.com, offer code JeffRubin. Okay, back to the show. What about Indica and Sativa? Is that real?
That's real.
Okay.
Yeah.
What have you learned about that?
So that's more on the genetic side of things.
So Indica and Sativa are the two main families of pot.
Right.
And
of the cannabis plant. Yeah.
What are they? I actually don't even really know what they are.
So they are, I think, I shouldn't even say because I'm not a biologist.
But why does anyone care? Why does anyone bother classifying them separately?
So, I mean, and that's one of those things where it's like, in the old days, I think people kind of classified weed between the kind that kind of like makes you talkative and creative and laugh, and the kind that makes you sleepy and want to sit on the couch and eat potato chips. Mm-hmm. And there's still kind of that like...
that axis?
Yeah, exactly. But as we're learning now, it's like, it's never quite that simple. It's like there's all these other things going on in this terpenes and all these other things. But... there is some truth to the fact that sativa plants are usually more on that kind of headier end of things, and indica plants classically are more on the end of like being stonier.
Do you test for the difference between the plants?
That's one thing we don't do.
Okay.
And I would refer you to Phylos Bioscience in Portland. It's a special lab that works on plant genetics.
And they just do that?
They just do that.
Is there any like consistency between strains? Like if I get Girl Scout cookies, if I get the Buddha in one store, and then 2 weeks later I drive across town and I get it in another store, is that going to be? Should I expect to have the same experience?
In Oregon, maybe actually, yeah. Especially because it might even be from the same farm, honestly. And in particular, like a lot of strains are becoming specific to farms, so it's easier to kind of trace where they come from.
But there's some generic names that are more common, right?
Yeah.
And is there any commonality between them, or are people just like latching onto the name?
There's no way to know.
There's no way to know.
There's no way to know.
So what do you do when you're
without testing all of it? Obviously,
when you're in Oregon and you're at the store, what do you do? How do you because how do you make a decision? It's almost like being in a wine store, right? Where it's like, I don't know, you're just looking at a bunch of bottles. You're like, I don't know, maybe that one. You kind of have a price point in mind, maybe. What do you think now as someone who does this professionally when you go into a dispensary?
And it's just like in a wine shop, you ask the sommelier, and in the marijuana shop, you ask the bud tender. And
what do you ask them?
Well, you tell them.
What's the right question?
Well, they ask you questions, and I think that's part of what's fun about it. What are you doing this weekend? Like, what are you making for dinner? Like, you
want to get high?
Yeah. And so I think they might tell you something different if you're like, I'm going whitewater rafting, and I'm going to, be drinking beers, and we'll be out in the sun, I want to smoke a joint, or maybe you're going to be watching a Battlestar Galactica marathon, and you might want a different strain for that.
Do you think that people take marijuana and specifically marijuana science less seriously because the strains have names like Lando Calrissian and like Bubble Butt or just whatever it is? Like, do you think that makes people kind of roll their eyes at the whole endeavor?
I think that it may have
a branding issue, perhaps.
Maybe, but it's funny how a branding issue turns into something like how quickly it turns into something that's kind of like nostalgia. It's like, I think all this cultural stuff, like marijuana culture is endangered as far as I'm concerned.
Ooh, why do you think that?
Well, because of this legalization effort. It's like, it's something that I believe must happen for a lot of reasons. I mean, just even from a social justice reason.
Of course, yeah.
It must be legal. But it's this other thing where it's like, I think the days of, smoking weed from someone who grew it down the street or someone who grew it on a small scale or grew it in pots in their backyard, is short-lived. It's like more and more, all the marijuana that gets consumed, and it's becoming consumed more and more by more people, will be grown on a big farm.
Isn't that good, though, that we'll have people like you testing it to make sure there's no pesticides and like that? Like, if this was like prohibition, we wouldn't like be bemoaning the loss of bathtub gin, right?
I look at it more like craft beer, honestly. So, and this is my personal opinion, and it's one of those things where I think that the best thing that could happen for it, and something that's compatible again with the culture, is a situation where there are lots of like small scale farms that can do business and that can stay alive. It's like people love craft beer because there's such like a rich variety of producers. It's like you can never try all of them, and it's kind of the same thing with marijuana. It's like, I don't think anybody wants to see a world where there's like Camel joints at the store, and that's like what 90% of marijuana is, and that's it.
Right.
But I don't see it going that way.
Why not?
Because I don't think that's what people want. It's like I think people like to have this variety, and they like exploring, and it's I think it's part of the consumer culture for it, is that it requires kind of a curious mind.
Are you at all concerned? I don't know if you follow the news, but we've got this new president, and there's sort of, I don't know that he's explicitly made a statement on this, but he's basically wrong just about every single possible thing you can have an opinion on. He's like on the wrong side of, so it seems fair. Like maybe, you might be concerned that he comes down on the wrong side of this. I mean, surely you guys have had that conversation. What do you think when you think about that? I
think that it's a ship that has sailed.
The marijuana being legal ship has sailed, and that it's too far gone, and it can't be pulled back.
It's way too far gone.
Do you guys have? Can you put your money in a bank? Is that a thing? Like, that's a thing when you talk about weed business a lot. You hear that.
You can't put it in a regular bank, I guess you could say. You can't go to Chase, for instance. I guess you could try, but what they will do is shut your account down.
Even with you, because you're not selling weed just because you're a weed adjacent business.
They don't want anything to do with it.
Right.
Yeah. So we never tried to open a Chase account. A lot of businesses do business in cash, which is kind of scary. There's a lot of work actually for ex-detectives and police officers to work in the security industry.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy because I can wrap my head around cash where it's a storefront and people are coming in and buying things, but you're you're dealing with you're like a B2B type thing. It's like
but if all the other Bs are using cash,
yeah,
that's what you gotta do.
So
it's changing a little bit.
But there are banks that will do business with marijuana businesses?
There are local credit unions that you can try.
Credit unions, yeah.
And there's a law in Oregon that basically says, hey, weed banking is legal in Oregon. But it doesn't hold much weight because obviously it's the federal laws that are the issue.
I heard you on another podcast, on Aaron Lammer's podcast, Stoner, which is a great new podcast where he interviews stoners, I guess, about pot. I think you were episode 1 and Nick Denton from Gawker was episode 2.
Yeah.
And it's a great podcast. And you were on that show talking about the fire. There was a fire next door.
Fire. Yeah.
What was that about?
It's another classic small business thing you don't want to go through. So it's crazy because, like, in the lab, obviously, we take great precaution against fire, and we have flammable cabinets, and we have all kinds of precautions. But
safety lighters with the bong. Sorry, keep going.
But there's nothing you can do if your neighbor has a fire, which is what happened.
Not specifically like what is the business and what are the name, but like, was it an auto repair shop, like a restaurant? What is it?
Yeah, it's it's like an auto paint place, a cheap auto paint place.
And they had a fire. Did it burn down? Just a regular, what happened?
So a big chunk of it burned down, like basically the front of their store. And it was enough to fill our lab with smoke and kind of cover everything with this horrible black crud. Mm-hmm. That is not good for sensitive lab instruments.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
We sat down on the curb and had a heavy feeling about it for a while, and we made an insurance claim. I mean, we lost a lot of time, which was the hardest thing, and it was like very difficult to kind of like move to a temporary place, and we had to move to like a non-lab location basically and like do as much work as we could.
How far in was this? Like, were you were set up? Was it already up and running? Or
No. It was maybe 2 or 3 months into it. So we had just built the lab though, which was like no small thing. It's like there's a lot of machines, right. There's computers, security, all this stuff. So we just had built it, and then there was this fire.
Filing an insurance claim of that size, is that an issue? Like, did you have to like?
That was incredible.
Like, you have to explain. I mean, you have to explain your business to them, right?
Yeah.
And are they like, okay, great, that sounds good?
That was another challenge, is you have to find people who are willing to work with you on those kinds of things. So it's like to get so property insurance, we had to, like basically sign a cannabis rider that says, we are a legal business as much as we can be, with the state, and here's our license, and we pay a few extra bucks just, for the sake of it. But there's a lot of business to be done. It's one of those things where it's just like, and it's one of the reasons I think that like it's too late to put the genie back in the bottle, is that it's already had such a huge impact on the economy, and it's produced so much money and jobs and ancillary business. When you say that it's too late, why do you think it's too late? Because it's too late to put the genie back in the bottle. Is there something people should be doing to like forward? I mean, there's so many things to worry about right now. Like this is really low on everyone's list, but I don't know, when you think about what needs to happen to like really push this whole issue forward, with a clear recognition, like, do not get involved in this unless you're also involved in something else first. Like, this has to be at best your second priority. But with that in mind, is it like, what should people do? Well, I think that they should look locally. Like, it's going to be different for every state, and it's like, I think you should support whatever your local state legalization is, and look at it closely. It's not every legalization measure is the same. In Oregon, we had a pretty good law passed. It's nothing's perfect, but I think Oregon did a pretty good job overall. I'm not going to name the state, but there was another one recently that they had a bill that would have essentially kind of centralized control for like all marijuana business amongst 5 rich people. Right. Why not name the state? It was in the news. I feel like I know what you're talking about. Did you have personal business with them? No, certainly not. But it's one of those things where the voters in that state were very wise to turn that down, even if they, personally support marijuana. So it's like, even if you don't like consume it or even really approve of it, it's like, I think that as an American, you have to ask yourself, like, if it's legal to drink, if it's, why shouldn't this be legal? Like, how much harm does it do versus, how much economic good, cultural good.
Have you ever had someone come in with nugs so sticky icky that the machine just like steam's coming out, like the arrow on the machine's like just flying in circles, like it's just off the charts? Like, was there one where you were like, whoa, this is the most powerful marijuana we've ever come across?
Not in a plant, but like in food products, yeah.
Oh.
So we tested a gummy bear, like a giant gummy bear.
Giant gummy bear.
Yeah, and it was, I forget what it was, but it was insanely potent. It was insane.
You can just test any food regardless. Like, you can test a chocolate bar just like you can test a gummy bear. That's the same machine.
Yeah.
That is the most impressive thing of all to me. What, like, liquids, just any food. You can throw any food in the drawer and it's like boop 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 boop.
We don't quite. So we have. It's actually fun because we actually freeze it with liquid nitrogen first, and it goes
fun.
And it goes into a thing called a cryo mill. So the very first thing we do is kind of turn it into this like cold powder that's like it's amazing because like a gummy bear, for instance, or a piece of licorice, like it's not so sticky anymore. It just kind of turns into sand.
What is the coolest machine you've got? What's your favorite machine in the shop?
So it's got to be the liquid chromatography mass spectrometer.
Why? What makes that the king?
It's the pesticide machine. It's the most sensitive. It takes days to like pump down the vacuum inside of it. It's just so hardcore. It's very, very sensitive. I love it.
Does it look like a new sleek computer gizmo, or does it look like old industrial machinery?
It's funny because like as lab gear goes, it looks very new, but it's definitely got like an old computer vibe to it. Like
cool.
It's like, yeah, it's not. It's got a nice outside, and the inside of it's just like a bunch of tubes and stuff. So
when you're shopping for mass spectrometers, that's what that thing was called.
Yeah.
When you're like, how did you pick that mass spectrometer over any of the other mass spectrometers on?
We went to the factory. We visited the factory.
Is it in Oregon?
It's in Oregon, yeah.
Is that machine only useful for weed, or could you do other things with it?
Oh, you could do all kinds of things with it.
Do you guys do non-weed testing?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you test?
So hops is another big one.
Oh.
And it's something we would love to do, actually. It's like we're kind of like in
You're not doing it yet, but you would like to do hops.
We don't have any customers yet, but we're ready for it.
Yeah, if someone came to you?
Yeah.
How do you... Sorry, wait, I have a follow-up question, but other things you can test.
We can test almost any plant organic thing. I mean, it's...
What other plants get tested for things? I guess foods.
Hops is another big one.
Yeah.
Grapes for wine in general. Anything that you're concerned about the terpenes levels for.
Whoa, there's terpenes in other things?
Yes.
I thought it was just weed.
Lots of plants.
Oh, no. Or, oh, yes. How you mentioned, like, if we could get hops customers. How do you get customers? Do you advertise, trade shows? Like, how do people in that world find out about you?
Both of those things, and word of mouth, and just classic Google, SEO stuff.
SEO stuff. You have customers, because the business has been up and running for how long now?
We've been open since March.
And it's what, May? So a few months.
Yeah, it's been a few months. So we're really still just getting started. It's kind of like a beta period for us, really still. But yeah.
How, when you find customers, is the idea... Anyone that uses you, like, no one's going to use you for, like, a one-off marijuana testing. Like, they're going to be growing marijuana a lot. So, like, the idea is to develop relationships with these people.
Yeah.
Do you have a salesman?
That would be my brother, Jesse. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And, man, what is the, you are a designer. You're a very good designer. That's, like, sort of what you did before all this. The website's very nice. Like, the logo's very nice. Is that all a piece of it? Did we even say what it's called? I actually don't know that we actually said the name of the lab now that I think about it. Is that possible?
It is possible, yeah.
I think I just said a marijuana testing facility when I opened it. When I opened the show. The name of the lab is Lightscale Labs. It is right. Lightscale Labs. Holy shit. We are about 45 minutes in.
Nice.
It's called Lightscale Labs, everybody. And so, yeah, but it's like, I don't know. You're like, you did that for people where looking good is like part of the core functionality of it, like Tumblr had to look good, Vimeo had to look good. I don't know that your marijuana testing facility website had to look good, so I'm assuming that your competitors, they don't, or a lot of them don't, almost certainly don't look as good as yours, right? Would you say yours is like, I don't know, more design? Like, is your website nicer? Anything like that?
I think that it's fair to say we're design focused. There are definitely a couple other labs.
Because the PDFs too, like if you have a PDF deliverable, like it sounds like a lot of your software is dedicated to like making the information digestible,
Exactly.
And that's a design challenge too.
Absolutely.
So are there other people doing that, or is that like what makes you guys unique?
It's within our market. I think that we're definitely like we have the prime focused on that. There are labs in other states that do it, a little more design focused. But for me, I think it's so important because it's exactly what you're saying. Like our product is data, and it's like to make data understandable and presentable and digestible is very much a design process.
Is there more you can do with the data besides just like giving the guy a PDF at the end of the session?
Definitely. So it's not something we've launched yet, but we're basically going to launch an analytics platform for marijuana. So if you're a grower, you should be able to tell over time, like if you have a product line, trends over time in terms of potency, in terms of pesticide levels, like how much of your product fails or passes certain tests.
So if I'm a grower, I'm keep testing my pot with you, I'm going to get just like Google Analytics.
Exactly.
Like I get like a nice line and see where I'm at, and over time, they don't have that today.
There are ways to accomplish that, but I think what we're aiming for is something that is far easier and far more kind of like, usable information than exists right now.
What kind of insights could a grower get from such a platform?
Well, they would definitely. So another thing that's interesting about strains, like you mentioned before, is that I think that there is kind of a shift towards like personally branded products and things that are like more about like a consistent experience over time. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's analogous again to kind of like the drink world. It's like there are lots of, say, like blended scotches, for instance,
right,
where it doesn't come from one distillery. But it's the same kind of taste and flavor and alcohol content and things from point to point.
Which seems with whiskey particularly difficult to do because of the brewing process, right?
Yeah, and so they do
it's
that.
like the wood is important,
yes.
Like how do you recreate that in Europe or wherever?
No, and I hear they do a lot of that by taste still, at least.
They have like a guy who's like just like
old,
swirls it around in his mouth, and he's like,
Scotch
more salt.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there an equivalent for a weed? Like someone who takes a hit is like, yeah, it needs to be. So, let it grow a little longer.
I guess like that's how it's been up until now. But that's what I'm saying is now what we have is an option where we can say, hey, like if you want to have your vape pen cartridge taste the same, have the same kind of like feel to it, the same effects, psychological body effects, you're going to want to have the same numbers every time, same terpene content, same this and that, and it's to keep that consistent. That's just one small thing.
Is that possible within marijuana to consistently grow the same plant over and to develop something that like I'm going to grow? It's like Bud Light. I'm going to grow it and sell it, and that's what it's going to be for the next 50 years. Like every time you get it, it's going to be the exact same plant.
Maybe not for like at the plant level. You could get very close, definitely with the same genetics, cloning every time, exact same conditions. Absolutely, you could get something it's that consistent.
I was in Portland recently. About 1 million goddamn marijuana dispensaries in Portland, right? There's hundreds in the state.
There's a million. There's literally a million.
In the state, there's got to be hundreds, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in Portland, there's probably at least 100. But testing facilities, how many of those are there?
That's a good question. There's a few, but there's only a few that do pesticide testing, for instance, which is kind of like the big thing and like the thing that's the hardest to do. So there's only a few labs that are like really full featured. It's one of those things also where it's like before this, there wasn't a whole lot of need for new lab testing. You know, it's like there's not a lot of compelling reason the agriculture industry doesn't change that fast. But the, sudden onset of all this stuff is just kind of open up the market.
I feel like we've talked about a few different expansion vectors, if you will. We talked about you do other states potentially in the future.
Yeah.
If you could figure out, the laws and whatever. There's possibly doing other food like hops. And then there's getting a little deeper and providing these analytics platforms. Is there anything else you're thinking like future of the business, like ways to go? It sounds like you're just getting started, really.
So there's the software platform about it. There's also like a lot of work we want to do with growers that isn't really being done yet. There's like so many interesting things about like controlling the grow process itself that like is not really being explored yet, and that's something I'm very interested in.
Like what?
So, I mean, checking, for instance, like the nitrogen levels or brick sugar levels.
We haven't really talked much about. I'm like, oh yeah, nitrogen. You gotta have nitrogen because we haven't really talked much about like the growing, and it's something I don't know anything about. And you hear me, law officers, I don't know anything about it. And like, if someone saw that their pot they were growing was getting weaker, like, what are some things they might do? Like, what are people doing differently? Like, what are some tweaks you might make in the process?
I mean, I'm really the wrong person to ask because growing is such an art.
Right. I'm just wondering what are even the knobs you have available to turn? Like how much water you put in, how much light you give them?
Yeah, definitely the timing. There's a light cycle. It's like over time you change the amount of light, and you kind of do like a night and day cycle if you're doing indoor.
But it's not like more light equals good. There's like a very you have to sort of trial and error it out, I guess.
Yeah, and if you're growing inside, it's like the distance from the light to the plant. Ventilation is a huge thing that's often overlooked. It's like you got to have airflow.
There must be so many people. There were so many people, like amateur people, doing this for decades or whatever. It must be such a crazy time. Like, is marijuana? And this is something you hear people say. Like, is marijuana more potent now than it was 20, 30 years ago? Is it getting more potent?
Oh yeah.
Like, is it more potent? So we know it's more potent than it was in the 70s. But is it more potent now than it was 10 years ago? 5 years ago?
So that's a good question, and it's a harder. Not as much. Like, no way. I mean, it's maybe more consistent.
But are they still getting better at it?
It's like there's definitely a ceiling to like how much THC you can pack into one.
There's
plant.
a theoretical limit.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. I've never actually thought about that before. But it's it's one of those things where it's like the future of marijuana is in these like processed products, and it's like it's not as much in like smoking flower anymore. And let's face it, like smoking is like kind of going on the weed side culturally too. It's
That's
like,
right.
It's messy. It's not good for your lungs. Like even smoking marijuana.
Whoa! What?
Yeah, it's not.
Huh? But it's not cigarettes. Hold on. I feel like maybe you were thinking of cigarettes. This is not cigarettes, so this is okay for you. No?
No.
Oh, okay. So, you think like edibles, vape pens also still bad for your lungs? One would have to assume they're like very like
verdict. Yeah, verdict pending.
Of,
I think on vape pens.
Sorry,
verdict pending. Like I'm not sure what the health. Like I think they're still exploring the health risks.
What are the other products? Like there's edibles. Everyone's heard of those. Yeah. But there's also like skin
Topicals.
Creams. Yeah. Is that real? That's real.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried such a product?
No. We recently tested some field balm for the first time.
Field balm.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Are there other like weird delivery devices, like something you like rub into your belly that I don't know about yet?
So like a Vicks, like
yeah.
Yeah, there's topicals. There's suppositories. That's an official.
No, there's marijuana suppositories.
Yes,
I guess it's medical. It's tell me it's medical, right?
I think that's the idea. It's medicinal. Anyway.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess. Okay. Have you tested any of those at the lab? Not personally.
I don't think so. No, not yet.
That's okay.
We await our first. If you're out there, suppository client, come see us.
Are there new delivery devices being innovated out there?
Yes, everyone's working on everything.
Yeah, it just seems like now there's like a business, like I don't know, there was no like business incentive to do it before, but like now there really
there's lots
is.
of like inventors working on things.
Yeah,
and, like, there's so much cool stuff happening. It's fun.
Do you go to like pot trade shows?
Yes.
What have you seen at a pot trade show?
Lots of pot stuff.
Is the pot trade show? Is it like fish music playing, or is everyone like in suits and like acting professional?
Yeah, it's all Dave Matthews, and if you're wearing a suit, they stop you at the door.
I mean, it could be a little of both. I could imagine. I guess I'm just wondering like what the vibe is.
No, it's definitely got its own kind of business culture, and it's one of those things also that's like changing a little bit, but it's like there's a lot of just small business people, I guess, and it's like a lot of them are farmers, a lot of them are just people who run shops and stuff, and they're all kind of interested in everything that's happening.
The only other thing I can think of where there is just all these small business people, because there's this new field that suddenly exists that didn't exist before, is kind of the internet.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of anything else where just suddenly there's this wide open thing where there's obvious potential and like people can just take it up if they're interested, right? Yeah. Would you say that's a fair comparison?
It's a lot. It feels to me like very similar to the internet in that way.
Is there anything else you can think of like that where just some new field opened up and it was kind of like a gold? The last one's probably the gold rush, in the 1800s yes, or something like that.
It's a similar thing where it's like, and it's funny because it's totally artificial. It's just like all been held back, and then all of a sudden it's just like they just pull the dam open and all the water's rushing out.
It is crazy. It's cool, and it's so impressive and fun that you're doing. Like I'm trying to think of a musician who releases an artist who releases albums in like wildly different genres over time. And I feel like that's what you're doing, and it's cool and exciting to see. Oh, Lightscale Labs. How can people follow it? All that sort of stuff.
Lightscale.com.
Lightscale, good. You didn't even you got lightscale.com. You didn't need the labs.
Didn't even need the labs.
Well done. How long did it take to come up with that name? It's a good name.
It was a long pen and paper process, and
because it's a great name and the logo's great. I'd encourage you to go check it out just because it's like well designed, like I was saying earlier.
That's great. Zach Sultan is our designer. He's amazing.
And
he used to be a Tumblr.
It's but it's not like shaggy dogs, weed testing. Like it looks like classy as all hell. You know,
There's no pot leaves.
Yeah. Was that a deliberate decision?
As much as I love
to not be
pot
like
leaves.
420 Testing Co.
Exactly.
Inc. Yeah, like you guys like worked hard on that.
Just a giant green.
Right. Well, I think you did it. It sounds like it's going well. And thank you again for teaching us all about it.
Thank you, Jeff.
That was a HeadGum podcast.